Ellie was 10 years old when I was working with her, and she has a deteriorating eye condition. When I first assessed her, I found she needed modified learning materials. She couldn't see the board, but she resisted all attempts to help her and didn't want to talk to the teacher or the Senko or anyone in the school, even me, about her problems. She would talk to her parents, but she wouldn't talk to anyone in the school. She refused to be identified as someone with a visual impairment. Yet Ellie presents as anxious and self-conscious, although she does a good job of covering it up. She doesn't want to lose her friends, which she thinks might happen if they start to see her as different. She tells her parents how she feels, but not the school. She downplays the impact of the teasing she's had, particularly from one of the pupils. How should we deal with this? Well, when looking at support issues, one factor should be always in our thinking: how can we provide support in a subtle way without singling out the child to make them appear different? And one way we can do this is by not using the heavy assistive technology that was once used with visually impaired children in a classroom. There are nowadays much more subtle, unobtrusive technologies that can be used that is actually fairly mainstream, like the iPad or a laptop, and they can be used quite efficiently with a visually impaired child without making her appear too different. I remember observing a college class. It was a sixth form college in which a partially sighted student sat right next to a boy who was using an iPad with a keyboard. I asked him why he was using the iPad and if he had a vision impairment. He said he didn't have a sight problem, he just preferred using the iPad. It made his work easier. Of course, when I wrote my report to the college, I recommended that they give the student exactly the same setup. The fact that she had another pupil in the class with the same setup actually normalised it for her. And so on. Why not give all children the same enlarged print size? Instead of just giving the visually impaired student large print, why not give all the children large print? They'll all find it more comfortable on their eyes, particularly in a primary school, and they won't complain. Or why not give all of the children coloured paper instead of white, instead of just giving it to the visually impaired? All the children will find it fun writing on colour paper in the primary school. That's one way of doing it, giving all the students the same kind of access as the visually impaired student has. Another aspect of this is that teachers, by their behaviour in class, can actually reduce and lower the anxiety of their visually impaired students by modifying their behaviour. And I recommend certain things to teachers, and I think if they actually follow these guidelines, it does really help to reduce the anxiety levels. One thing I suggest is try to stand close to the sight impaired student with your face clearly visible. If you think that a pupil who has a vision impairment has difficulty reading your facial expressions from a distance, and that's so important because we communicate so much by our body language, sometimes far more than we do by our words. So if you stand close to the child within their actual range, then they will be able to see your expressions and read your lips, and it will be much more pleasant for them. Secondly, I suggest that people speak slowly and clearly and don't rush and talk too fast. The pace of our speech makes a big difference, especially if you're trying to follow written guidelines as well. So if you repeat the key information and key instructions, that really helps a child with learning difficulties, special needs, and a child with a sight impairment in particular. Another thing I suggest is using the name of the student, of the child, frequently, because very often a child with a sight impairment sort of gets lost, and the more you actually give their name and state their name, the more they feel included, and it kind of raises their sense of self-esteem. And this is part of what I would call positive discrimination, because I think there is a valid case for positively discriminating towards children with learning difficulties and the sight impaired child. That is, ask them questions more often to make sure that they understand. Give them small responsibilities to make them feel valued and raise their self-esteem. This all helps to improve the confidence of the child. And then finally, try to avoid saying to the pupil, can you see this, Ellie? What does it say, Ellie? If you actually draw attention to the fact that they have difficulty seeing, that's the worst possible scenario, really. It makes the child feel really embarrassed. There are more subtle ways of finding out if the child is accessing the information. And the last thing you want to do is draw attention to their disability. So teacher behaviour is a very important aspect, not making them feel too anxious. There are more pressures on a sight impaired young person in a classroom than there are upon others. They experience greater difficulty simply because they have more difficulty keeping up with the pace of the lesson. They have more difficulty handing in homework on time. They have more difficulty in finishing the classwork on time. So one way you could actually modify this and help them is by giving them a little less to do than the other students. And that's not a bad thing, but it's actually called differentiating. If you actually reduce the number of tasks that they have to complete, then they can complete their work just at the same time as the other students in the class can complete their work. There's something called signposting. Just basically means directing a family, a parent or a child to services that may be of help to them. And this is simply because many people just really don't know what support there is available, and they don't know where to go for help. And it's important that we signpost children and young people in the right direction so that they know where to go. There are many services that can help: helplines, chat rooms, educational websites, and that's quite apart from the doctor or the ophthalmologist, the psychologist. Sometimes the children are particularly anxious because of the way the parent actually reacts to their disability. And I think this is something that we have to be really sensitive about and really careful with, because we're not in that situation. We're not parents of a child with, well, you may be, but or you may not be. But if you had a child with a disability, think about how you would react. And some parents tend to be overprotective. And it's important that we actually try and support those parents and help them. Certain parenting styles can actually contribute to the anxiety of a child. Over-consoling a child, constantly reminding them of danger, preventing them from taking risks. These can actually have the opposite effect and make them more anxious. What we might call a cosseting parent, or a helicopter parent because of their constant hovering, I think that's the proper word, who pays extremely close attention to what's going on in school, and they excessively monitor the child and their progress, and they're constantly phoning up the school in really what's inappropriate way. They need as much support as their child does in many ways. They want their child to be safe, they want their child to succeed, and they just don't know how to go about it. The parent means well and is very, very well motivated. So how do we help such parents? I think the thing to do is to bear in mind that they may be just as anxious and stressed out themselves. So avoid making accusations. Don't make parents become defensive, because that's not at all helpful. We can discuss styles of parenting objectively in group sessions with other parents. and such parents can be given the opportunity to talk themselves. So it's important to be objective, not to become emotional, as this will all become self-defeating. And a key thing, always remember that the ultimate goal is the child's independence. Never underestimate the resilience of the children. Young people with vision impairments are remarkably resilient. I leave the final word to one of my students who lost his vision in his teens due to glaucoma. He was offered counselling, but he never took it up. But what worked for him was keeping up positive routines, exercising, being with his friends, and focusing on his work. And he recommends the following. He says, if you're focusing on the things outside of your head, then they're the things that will take priority in your life. It's what matters to you that will affect you in the end. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave any comments below, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much. Bye.